If you've got really genuinely close friends that are non-threatening and you absolutely know that, and a partner is so threatened to the point of not wanting you to maintain that relationship, to me, that is a non-negotiable red flag. It also is part that it makes Jackson more attractive to me. Like the more that,
You can be hotter. You hear that?
yeah,
You
I mean,
can
like,
be more hot if you just
like it's more
yeah.
attractive to me the more he trusts me.
Hey everyone, it's Ava, co-host of Monocurious. Welcome to the last episode of our mini-series by Polycurious. In this series, we explored the question, what does monogamy look like in the 21st century? Today, we had the pleasure of speaking with Tory and Jackson, a monogamous couple living in community at Lightning Society. Lightning Society is a co-living residence and event space in Brooklyn, New York. With nearly 20 residents and hundreds of community members, their platform is for the community, by the community, encouraging their members to share their passions and expertise.
Hi everyone, this is Fer. Today, Tori tells us how growing up in a religious community and witnessing her friends' experiences with unhealthy relationships made her decide to become, in her own words, a champion friendzoner. And what that means is that instead of focusing on dating, she decided to have her emotional needs met by close friends while maintaining her independence. And this is why, for most of her 20s, she remained happily single. Jackson, on the other hand, saw himself falling into one monogamous relationship after the other, and he often felt like he lost himself in them. It wasn't until he met Tori that he realized that he could actually continue to grow in a relationship as opposed to feeling stuck.
Like Rome, their relationship was not built in a day. As they were falling in love, they both entered unknown territories. For Jackson, it was getting to know Tori's non-sexual close friendships. For Tori, it was unexpectedly mourning her identity as a single person and the shift in dynamics with her intimate relationships. Through check-ins and conversations, they both learned that having their non-sexual needs met by a community of friends actually strengthened their relationship. And I think today's conversation really shows how solid and special their relationship is, because they don't rely completely on each other for all of their needs.
For me, personally, learning about non-sexual intimacy really inspired me to practice more of that. As someone in an open relationship where I often have a lot of freedom to connect sexually with others, if there's an attraction, I often take the opportunities that come along to connect in that way. But listening to Tori made me reflect on the fact that being friends instead might actually be more meaningful and enriching, and of course, it comes with less complications.
As a single, monogamous-leaning person, I related so much to Tori's experience in this episode. From champion friend-zoning, to questioning being single, to having my needs met from my non-sexual, intimate relationships. And in particular, the variety of deep emotions and attachments that come with that level of intimacy. On top of extreme joy, belonging, safety, and nourishment, there's also jealousy, sadness, and the relational shifts that happen as our lives transition. This episode really made me feel seen in my experience, and I hope it will for you as well. Here is our episode with Tori and Jackson.
Tory and Jackson, welcome to Monocurious. When Ava and I came up with the idea to start the series, you guys were recommended, and even though I didn't know you guys very well, we are all in the same community, and just your enthusiasm with the project and how open you are to sharing your relationship, which is a very special one and one that I feel like a lot of people can learn from.
No.
Is really inspiring. So we're just thrilled to have you.
We're thrilled to be here.
Thank you guys for joining us. So just to kick us off, it would be awesome to hear about who you guys are and who you were when you met each other.
For sure.
Amazing. Well, yeah, we're so happy to be here. Honored to be asked. And thank you both. These are really interesting and amazing conversations. So we're excited to be a part of it.
Definitely. So where do we want to start? You want to, I guess from the beginning is a very good place to start.
A very good place to start. So we met in
2019.
We were both actors in LA, and we were both cast in a new project. It was a national tour of a new, very large, immersive, high-tech production. And we met on the first day of rehearsal. So we are technically what in actor speak is called a showmance. Which is when you fall for someone in your cast. And often showmances kind of have this like eye roll.
It's very cliche.
I certainly felt that way. I was like, that is so not me. Because there are just like some people in the actor world who sort of seem to like do that all the time.
Yeah.
That's their thing. They fall in love with whoever.
Every show, it's a new love.
So it's also super rare to have a showmance that lasts. And here we are 3.5 years later.
Going on 4.
And so we met on the first day of rehearsal. And the kind of meet cute aspect as well was that I had just spent about 1.5 years away from pursuing acting. I did 14 months of solo travel in my mid-20s, and I had come back to LA. Our stage manager had put the whole cast in a Facebook group, and I posted in the Facebook group before meeting anyone, hey, is there anyone who'd like to carpool? And Jackson actually did not respond.
Never. I would never.
And someone else did, one of the older gentlemen in the cast, and he picked me up, and he was kind of a funny guy, and he just like made pretty clear that was a unique circumstance because it was a holiday and there was too much traffic to come pick me up every day. And
Yes. My joke is that I had to make sure that she was as cute in person as she was online before I committed to picking her up every day. But mostly it was just like I forgot to respond. And then, I walked in, saw her, introduced myself, and was like, hey, I actually live right down the hill from where you're staying, and I can 100% take you home today if you want.
Yeah. So he drove me home and then came and picked me up the next day and had coffee and avocado toast and was like,
which is like $100 commitment in Los Angeles.
And frankly, I was like, this is going to be my butt, right? Like, okay, definitely the cutie in the cast, but like not going to just, we signed these year-long contracts. And so I was very much in a place of like, I am just not even going to go there with anybody. Which was also just so my kind of thing anyway. But pretty much by the end of the first week.
Yeah, it was quick.
We were like, oh.
It was quick.
Wow. 1 week of car rides.
Yeah, it was really wild. And there was a commonality of I had been single for 4 years previous.
Me too.
And you as well. And so we had, both been in these long stretches of really
self-work is what I call it.
Self-work and self-exploration and like really, at least I'll just speak for myself. Like I, spent most of my 20s really happily single, and it was so easy for me to just immediately like not feel excited about someone. And I was a really champion friend zoner, frankly. Like I think I just very much existed in a world where I really genuinely want to be friends with you, and I know that this isn't it and so I would just rather nip it in the bud and be friends, because I think that I actually value, at least at the time, it was like I value that more than I actually do dating anybody. So why don't we just stop there? And so I got really, really good at sort of navigating that, interest into let's actually genuinely be friends, really, until Jackson came along. And there was like this very palpable difference of like, oh, whoa, okay, this is like, he's like, this is like boyfriend material.
I had a car.
This is like partner material. And then he drove me around for the next 3 years.
He brought the avocado toast.
I did bring
on the first day.
Toast.
So that says a lot.
Boyfriend material.
It's really good.
I really loved the term you used, champion friend zoner. I feel like I could relate to some of that in my my 20s as well.
Yeah.
So like speaking of that time, I'd love to learn about what your dating history and relationship history had been up until that point.
Yeah, we had very different styles of dating in our 20s. For most of my 20s, and maybe really my whole life since I like started understanding that I liked girls, I kind of found myself very easily going from relationship to relationship and like serious relationship to serious relationship. I never was a casual dater. If I like hooked up with somebody, that was minimum a 6-month commitment. And then when my longest relationship before Tory ended, it was a relationship of 4 years. I left that relationship not really knowing who I was, because I had been kind of defined my adult self as a person in this relationship that wasn't right for whatever reason. And then it's scary, it's confusing, it's all sorts of feelings when you suddenly find yourself without a core part, which you thought was a core part of your identity. I remember having a conversation with myself out loud, like, what do I actually want out of life? What do I think of myself personally? Do I even really like myself? And what are the answers that I found were not particularly pleasing to me. I was like, I really didn't know who I was as a single person, as an individual person. And that was like the conscious decision that I made to like, okay, I'm not going to do this thing that I always do, which is, 2 to 3 months from now, get a crush on a girl and end up in another long-term relationship. That was a great choice for me because it led to years of self-work, self-care. I think there's a lot of power and positivity in being selfish, and especially in certain times of your life. And I think a lot of people are afraid of being that. All that's to say is it led up to this moment where I was entering this show and I was like so excited for all the new people that I was going to meet and all that stuff. And the last thing on my mind in any way was, oh yeah, let's go find a life partner. And then of course the universe says, hey, actually, now's the perfect time for you to be open to that. Here's this. And it's just one of those great alignments that happens every once in a while.
I feel like that's a common theme in the podcast. Most couples say that they met at a point where maybe they weren't looking for that because they were focused on themselves, right? And that's how it goes. When you focus on yourself, you are in a better place to actually be with other people. So
totally.
And Tori, you mentioned previously that you were a champion friend zoner, and I hear a similar theme with Jackson. Not really, because he seems like perhaps had more relationships than you did, but sounds like you both kind of had this idea of, if it's not the one or if it's not worth it, like, I don't want to like casually date. It sounds like you both were looking for committed relationships and not so much just hooking up for fun.
Yeah, I think the common thread is neither of us in our own ways had that draw to sort of lots of hooking up for fun or like lots of casual dating. Part of it's my background too. I grew up in a very strict church environment that had really strong parameters around dating. It was a non-denominational Christian church where you actively choose as a fully formed, although I think still too young for many of the people who did choose it, starting at age like 12, but you choose it as a grown person to become baptized. And when you're baptized, you're then a disciple in the church. So even those of us kingdom kids who grew up our whole lives in the church, you weren't really in the church until you became a disciple. And as the kingdom kids grew into teenagers, this like crux would happen because like you weren't supposed to date a disciple, but you also weren't supposed to date non-disciples. So you were just kind of off limits from anything. And so a combination of that, and I had a few of my very dearest friends in high school go through really emotionally and some physically abusive relationships. And I think it just sort of, for me, as a very naturally independent, kind of strong-willed person, I had a very strong reaction of like, well, fine. I don't need it. Like, I don't need boys. I don't need anybody. Like, most people in my life who are obsessed with boys and like actively dating, like they seem miserable. All these relationships are terrible. And then the whole church thing. So like my response was to just kind of defiantly be like, well, I'm fine. That kind of being a part of my identity too. It was like, okay, I'm this, like young woman and I'm just not interested in dating. And so I think that also was what really strengthened that friendship muscle, because I love men and I love the men in my life. And I've always had really close male friends. So I think there was also, I've always had that really strong resistance to the concept that men and women can't be friends. I was like, I'm going to prove that wrong. So I went to college, had never dated anybody, had never been in a relationship. College was the first time I like started dipping my toe in the water of like hooking up with anybody. And then, sophomore year of college, end of that year, one of my very great guy friends, who I known was interested in me, but had kind of like pushed away. And, I did that thing where I was like, maybe it's me, right? Like, why am I not open to this? I should go for it. Like, here's someone who I know I love and I know I care about and they want this. And, like that sort of talking yourself into it. And we started dating, and it like immediately just all of those things that I think I, as that very independent person, had feared, like totally came out. He was like very jealous and very possessive, and mostly just this like putting me on a pedestal thing. It was like, oh, okay, you like love this idea of me, but actually who I am doesn't seem to make you happy, because these things I'm doing are making you upset or incredibly insecure or scared. But I got out of it very quickly. I mean, we dated for like 2 months, 3 months. And that was really tough on the social group. But if you learn anything, I think as actors, it's like really how to exist in communities where people have dated each other, because it's just a small thing. But basically then, I was single the rest of college. After college, similar thing, close guy friend, and whom I do and did love very dearly. And he was like, I want this. And we kind of waffled for a long time. And I did that thing where I like talked myself into it. And that lasted for a year and a half. And the exit of that was challenging, because I just had this really strong feeling like nothing was wrong. He was a lovely person. But I was like, this is not who I'm going to live my best life with. And I know that. Like, I know it in my core, and I don't know how to do anything but kind of break this thing. And that was so painful for everyone. And I think like no one gives quite enough credit to the ones doing the breaking up on how hard it is and how damaging it can be to have to damage someone like that you care about, even if you know it's the best thing. And so after both of those experiences, I think I was just like, I cannot convince myself again to get into something, because it's just too painful when I have to cut the cord, because I know it's not right. Anyway, I think that's where that real deep champion friend zoning, is part through been doing it since being so young and knowing I couldn't date anyone. And so any advance, like turning that into let's be great friends, was kind of a survival instinct in a way for me of dealing with it without feeling the weight of how sad it was that I actually just wasn't allowed to have like romantic feelings for anyone. And then I think it really grew into this place of loving people and loving building relationships. But the pressure of being on that pedestal and the pressure of the two relationships I had been in that very much had that, like, you are my everything, like, don't leave. Like, it just was too much pressure for me, and really enjoyed being single. And I think I genuinely thought I might be single forever. I think once I found this sort of diverse canon of my village of people who could give me the love that I really felt like I needed, and that was enough, I was like, I think I'm good. And then I met Jackson, was like, oh, well, this is fun.
There's still
You know,
surprises.
like there are
Yeah.
still surprises. And, I think I just was like, I can't imagine actually wanting to hang out with any one person for that amount of time to have a relationship. And then, we met, and it's actually insane that how much time we've spent together.
Yeah.
And
But I've been in relationships where I've definitely spent like less time with a person than I spend with Tori, but I felt entirely codependent. Where like you start to your world starts to collapse around you and you find yourself in a very small box. The way Tori and I work is, even though we are in like, close proximity with each other a lot, but during those times, it's like we've never lost sight of who we are as individual people. There's never been like this like coagulation and amalgamation into like one gross person. My background being like, it's not even that I was looking for the one or soulmate or whatever. It was much easier. It was really easy to like get into a relationship and just like coast. And I that was what I really, really started not liking about myself, was like, again, these relationships, nothing was inherently like incredibly toxic or bad or like on the surface level, oh, this needs to end. It was more of like, this is not actually benefiting any of us in a way that in a way that is helpful, or is in a way that helps you grow or evolve. It's very much staying exactly the same. And I'm so grateful for all of those relationships, because like, and I don't count any of them as failures. I count them as incredible learning experiences to, get me to where I am now, which is just like, I'm happy as a clam. I've never been happier. Like, and that's not just to do with our relationship. That's to do with who I've become as individual person, as a single person in a relationship, like that kind of thing.
I mean, it sounds like you guys are truly meeting each other, and not like Tori, from your past experiences, there was a lot of kind of unhealthy weight, kind of imbalance. It sounded like I relate to you, Tori, a lot, in the sense that like choosing friendships felt better and safer than like a strong commitment. But also, I think maybe there's something to be said about meeting someone that really feels like your match, and that you would want to really invest all of that vulnerability and connection with. Okay, like one small question I had for you is, did you become a disciple? Like, did that also? No, you didn't. Okay, so like you had that. But it was so strongly influenced during your teenage years. So I was curious if you became a disciple and rebelled.
yeah, no, I did not become a disciple. I did, though. I guess I would have been 16. Yeah, I did spend a few weeks one summer teaching abstinence-based sexual education to middle schoolers.
Virginity is cool.
Like,
virginity
quite
is
literally.
cool.
Where I had to sign a contract saying that I was not going to have sex before marriage. So
for what it's worth, I also signed a contract that said I wasn't going to have sex before marriage. Different church, but same contract.
And
So
how did you guys overcome that, like that stigma? I'm not sure like when you actually ended up having sex, but I can imagine it to be difficult.
yeah, it was hard and confusing. I don't remember it exactly this way, but when I left to go traveling in my 20s, I was packing up my apartment. I found all these journals and I found all these entries from my freshman year of college where, there was a point somewhere in the middle of the year where I was starting to feel down, and, I'm sure just very natural freshman year stresses and whatnot. And all this writing about, like, is this Satan, basically? Like, am I feeling this way because I have now started doing all of these things? And I didn't have sex until that first boyfriend my sophomore year. And I think I'm just very grateful that even though that relationship wasn't a very healthy relationship, I had a very healthy like first sexual experience and relationship. And I'm glad that experience was what it was, because I do take sex seriously. and to finally get to a place where I'm like, I can believe that this is important, but I also can really consciously choose that this is exactly what I want right now. And so I'm grateful that I came into it really in my own way. And I just feel like it was the best case scenario from my upbringing, because it's definitely a mind fuck. There's a lot around the sex thing. And even though I had a great awakening kind of into that world, it definitely is hard. And I think that absolutely could be a huge part of informing, and I'm sure is, the desire for more casual sex and casual dating. Like, just, I don't know. It was like, I don't know. But I also didn't have like a huge emotional or like physical draw towards that.
Yeah. I got lucky because my parents are awesome. I went to, Catholic school, and I was a baptized Catholic, but I went to Catholic school because it was the best school in the area. And there was some things that weren't great about some of the stuff that they were teaching there. But my parents also just were like there for us, and that, we could ask any questions we wanted, but they also were aware of what we were being taught at school, and like in some sex ed classes and some, religion classes or whatever, stuff about how, like, you'll go straight to hell for masturbating, that kind of thing, which is a terrible thing to say to a seventh grader. When like that's kind of all you want to do. And yeah, so I just remember several conversations with my parents where they were like, look, you feel free to ignore this. This is not, none of that is real.
Were they like, you can masturbate, it's okay?
Yeah. My dad was like, yes, please go for it. It's really healthy. Just, just don't do it at the dinner table. That's all we ask. And I still to this day have not. And so, yeah. And then I went to a Jesuit high school and fell in love with the theater, and started becoming really, really close with lots of gay people.
Yeah. I actually think the growing up, both of us in these theater communities, being theater kids, the communities from a very young age around theater have a lot of that sort of like non-sexual intimacy baked into it. It was so fun because at a very young age, and again, for me, it was like, ooh, I'm not allowed to like touch anybody at church, like there's these rules. And yet here I am now. I went to an arts high school, and we all like hang out. We're all like laying on top of each other, rolling around on mats all the time. We sit on each other's laps. Like, it's this very...
I had co-ed sleepovers in high school of, girls and boys, and everyone was like sleeping in the same room on the floor, just like, kind of loosely cuddling with each other.
Yeah, we can be close, and we can be flirty, and we can kind of have this intimacy without it being like we're trying to hook up with each other.
Yeah.
And so then, yeah, like my couple relationships and all of my things we've already talked about, I just was like, yeah, there was a lot of resistance. And much of that I realized was like, there was stuff I wanted to do on my own, and especially as a young woman. And I'm so personally grateful for my own trajectory, because there's a precious amount of time as a young person, and I think especially a young woman, where you really get to prove to yourself that you can live an amazing life on your own. And I think a lot of people don't give themselves that chance. It wasn't until, my mid-20s and I finally made some friends who were in a relationship that I was like, oh, that's cool. Wow, they've got this great relationship. And I think so much of it was that I became so close to them. We just developed this really special relationship between the three of us, and they sort of like brought me into their world. And they're the friends that brought me to Burning Man the first time. That's when I sort of started emerging into this world. And that's certainly through them. Met another couple, and it's through them that I encountered Lightning Society the first time. After, having spent a good amount of time traveling in my 20s and doing hostel living and doing the travel thing, it's like here, everyone in New York, like everyone we know, like goes and travels for, 3 to 6 months of the year. And, where I was in my 20s in LA, in this community of actors, it was unheard of.
Nobody.
Like nobody understood. Everyone was like, what? Like, okay. Like, it was such a departure, and it was so this crazy like thing that I just felt this deep need to do. Maybe I'll want to travel forever, or someday I'm going to open up a hostel. And then I came here and I was like, people can just live this way all the time. Like, you can live with other people, you can do this, and you can do it as a grown adult, totally participating in society. Like, it's just this kind of different thing. We met, the world kind of fell apart. Yeah, we started dating, and then this show we were in got canceled. We got fired. We were like, okay, now what do we do? As that year went on, we started homing in on New York. I did some marinating on what my dream New York life would look like. And it was just like, Lightning Society. That's it. I want to live there.
And I was like, what's co-living?
Yeah. And so anyway, I feel like I'm going on, but
And I remember you mentioning that you are the only couple that lives there, right? You are surrounded by a bunch of single people and open-minded people, many of whom have also explored non-monogamy or are curious about it. So yeah, I'm curious about how you guys, decided to maintain your relationship monogamous, being in this context that's makes it easy to at least be curious or try to explore in that way.
I just don't have this like strong emotional or physical desire to have sexual intimacy with a lot of people. It's just, and it's never really been a thing for me, but even in, like, it still isn't. My desire to have deep emotional intimacy with people is still incredibly strong. And I think from the beginning, we met and we'd go out in LA during this like showmancy rom-com of a summer, and we would sit there and I explained in detail these relationships that are so important to me and as non-negotiables. Like, these are not relationships I'm willing to sacrifice. And so part of loving me is like embracing this, and that was something I feel like, was a little more foreign to Jackson when we met. And yet his embracing of those worlds and the conversations that we've consistently been able to have, showing up to the table over and over again, are a huge part. And so I think living at Lightning, before I'll hand it over to you, is in so many ways to me like my perfect world, because I love this core foundation of our relationship. And I do think we enhance each other's lives while being very independent people. But like, the idea of totally isolating and like living alone, God forbid, in the suburbs, not that that's a bad thing, but it's like, this kind of cultural trajectory of you get in your relationship and then you kind of separate more and more, is that does not feel natural to me personally. And so this being able to have what we have while being surrounded by all of these interesting people that we get to have amazing conversations with and connect with is very important to me. So I think that is just a part of monogamy that I wish was more talked about or just explored. Like that it was just more free to, you can be in a committed relationship and still like have a very, very, very rich canon of connections and intimacy with so many people, and you need it. So how to weave that into your life?
Yeah. So there's something too, I think, humans being together in this like tribal sense and really connecting and having intimacy. And I think it's a natural part of who we are. And like the isolation has just kind of occurred over time. I don't think we were meant to be isolated. And it's really beautiful to interview you guys. A beautiful example of how monogamy can be really exciting and healthy, and you can be expanded and really interesting.
And like when we first started dating, and there's all these different styles of relationship. It was really exciting, sometimes scary and made me anxious, but I very quickly understood that that was purely a recollection of how I had felt in every relationship that I had been in before. And what I mean by that is a trap of monogamy is you put yourself into little and little and little boxes. And because it's, to be frank, like just easy, it's very comfortable to all of a sudden find yourself like, oh, it's just the two of us, and there's all of a sudden nothing else there. And I was like, wait, well, I was never happy in any of those relationships, not really, especially towards the ends of them, because I felt alone in a relationship, and which is like an oxymoron, you'd think, but I think it happens to a lot of people. So when we were, learning about each other still, and exploring each other's worlds and all that stuff, it was really interesting to me. It was like, oh wow, this is 100% a way to ever have a feeling of being alone in a relationship, because I've always known that, like, it's crazy to expect one person to fill your cup, and it's a lot of pressure to put on not only yourself but the other person, and totally unfair. In my mind, emotional needs, those can be and should be filled, wherever they need to be filled. And that was like, it was interesting. It was like a 6 month, I would say, like, crash course of these revelations, like kapow, 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 all these like wonderful like lessons and epiphanies. And sometimes that can be like a little overwhelming, for sure, because they're like, oh, that's different than how I used to think about things, so I've got to kind of rewire myself. And yeah, like, I will say that throughout our entire relationship, the bedrock of it, and it's very cliche, I know, but it truly is, like, every time without fail, we'll have the conversation. There's never an avoidance of having the conversation. There's never any fear that the conversation is going to lead to anything bad, because we both are coming from a place of self-respect and respect for each other.
Or sometimes there's fear, but
and, oh, sure. I mean,
it's not like, oh, everything is like
no, but
total daisies
what I mean,
and
like,
roses all the time, but absolutely.
See, now we're
And
having a fight.
when
Yeah.
when you
Yeah.
refer to the conversation, are you saying just like any conversation within your relationship?
Yeah, I simply mean communication, where, like, inevitably in a relationship, things are going to come up, friction's going to happen. Like, that's true of any relationship, not just romantic partnerships.
But also specifically, like, we have communicated a lot from the beginning around this particular topic.
Around non-monogamy?
Yeah.
Yeah, and just sort of like, what are the boundaries of even just that intimacy?
Yeah.
Navigating, right, a world where we allow our hearts to be just a little more open. Like, it's a push and pull. Like, there's the evolution of the comfort levels in that, like, opening up, right, that's okay, and it's okay to like have other people fill emotional needs. And then I think for me as well, like, yeah, how to balance not wanting to feel like I need to pull back on those things, while also knowing that being in a relationship, you're holding someone else's heart and needs, and not wanting to, and, everyone's like, oh, like, what is it? How do you be true to yourself and also respect that by committing to a partnership, you are, like, taking into account someone else's feelings, but not also letting those feelings run your life, or letting those feelings hold you back from doing things that are really corely important to you. And I think we've had a keen sense of that, and the communication is like the cadence around that. Like, I feel like, consistently,
We love checking in on
both
each other.
of us, it's like, when we're in these situations, like, I'm feeling this, and often it's like, okay, you're feeling that, but that's actually not how I feel, and maybe, you're projecting that onto me, and I'm okay. And I do think from the very beginning, we've had really open, like, concise conversations about how we're feeling. How does that make you feel? What are the boundaries? What are your, like, non-negotiables? And then what are things that we can keep showing up and keep massaging and playing with? So I think that it's been helpful for us because from the very beginning, that's been part of our conversations.
Yeah.
So it's not something we've totally had to learn. And especially in moving here and moving to Lightning and, these communities that have a lot more polyamory around us. I think, we're pretty solidly in a place where we like deeply respect it. And I also think like anything else, there are super unhealthy monogamous relationships and some really healthy ones. And there are super unhealthy polyamorous relationships, that we see and some really healthy ones. And I think more than anything, I'm just definitely, especially after moving here and how much we feel like we're thriving in it as a monogamous couple, I think that's where I see this sort of next revolution or just this next like awareness, which is why I do believe in co-living so much.
And it's definitely made our relationship stronger. Like it's allowed us to be more of ourselves. Does that make sense? Like as individuals and as a couple. I really honestly think that this world that we've, immersed ourselves in has allowed us to really like solidify the foundation of our relationship. It's been really cool to see that happen. And I think it's because we're surrounded by so many different types of relationships.
Yeah. And so many people too, right? You have like 16 other roommates. And but I'm curious because I know you said that you guys have check-ins regularly. And Tori, you mentioned that you have, these deep, emotionally intimate, non-sexual relationships with couples. Like, has there ever been any like conversations or check-ins about these other relationships impacting yours potentially? I'm really curious to hear if you guys had any experiences where there was a challenge that came up that you guys had to work through with those relationship dynamics.
I would say the answer is definitely yes. I mean, it's been interesting. I think at the beginning, there was so much joy for me in Jackson's openness to hear about these dynamics and be like, great. Like, I don't want you to be anything other than you are. Like, I think that's what you said, and it was just like, wow. And then as people came to visit and these communities that, we've been talking about came and Jackson just fully embraced them. And then absolutely, like I would almost say every step of the way, like it's been interesting because it's been a combination of Jackson becoming more open to that. And also for me, absolutely. It's like it changes, and I think especially in the first year and a half, like there was mourning going on for me in this like, whoa, this is great. And this is real and this is awesome. I also just have like I'm like a major mourner of my life. Like I'm such a bittersweet, nostalgic person. Like as any change, even when it's so exciting, I have like deep pain for like letting things go. And so there was this magical part of myself that I deeply loved in my single life of freedom and that had nothing to do with pursuing sexual relationships, but had a lot to do with this identity I built around my being able to be this free and flitty thing. And then my place in these other relationships that frankly comes down to the fact that I was made, still am, but was made to feel during this particular chapter, just like so deeply seen and special. And as this other person who came into my life broke open this barrier of trust that allowed me to really dive into this single relationship that also made me feel so seen and so loved, this negotiating of like this new role and then the new role with them, because there also is very much from them a feeling of like, we really love your relationship and believe in it. And like, we don't want to step on any toes or make any Jackson uncomfortable. And so like this like, we're gonna roll it back the affection a little bit, which was really hard for me because I was like, wait, no, like I don't want anything to change. And that can be hard too, because like that at times would come across. I would get more resistant to being affectionate around Jackson with them, just lots of micro dynamics there. Just at the end of the day, like that even when it feels scary, not being afraid to like acknowledge things and have a conversation about it. And I think Jackson's willingness to just like show up to that table from the beginning has allowed us to keep going and keep working through the dynamic.
I mean, just for my part, like just my background was different and it was unlocking a lot of new things for me. So there's different, like, it was a very, very emotional time. Like falling in love with someone is an inherently emotional experience. So there's that, there's like boundless joy. There's just pure expression. And then there's also these moments of like, whoa, these are also new feelings that like look amazing, but I also don't know how to process them. So that can be overwhelming. And sometimes that can lead to being like, I'm like feeling tense and I don't know why. Some people would say, oh, that's like a jealousy or that is an envy or whatever. And I can say for my part, it never was that for me. It was a feeling of like, there is a lot happening that is new in my life. I need to allow myself to take the time to process it like almost one at a time. Because if I let it all flow through me, there's a potential that could crack me.
So you had to get used to seeing Tory being intimate, like both physically, not sexually, but, cuddly or whatever, and also spending significant amounts of time with other people. And that was, because you weren't used to it, that was bringing up some tension.
For sure. And also, but like I'll also say for Tori's part and for these dear friends of like that have become very, very, very dear friends of mine as well. Like I was never not included from the beginning. I felt the strong desire and want and need to have me there too. And then like there's also the balance of like, here I'm falling in love with this person and I love being around this person in every single moment because, who wouldn't? She's great. Look at her.
She's great.
But also knowing that I feel very secure in this relationship. There's no need for me to absolutely go do your thing, and learning how to communicate that. For my part, a lot of sometimes the sticky moments we had, which we like always worked through and, we'll continue to work through in the future, came from, like I'm a pretty good reader of people and I'm a really phenomenal reader of Tori. I just know how she's feeling. I don't know how to explain it other than that. I just do. That sense of mourning that she talked about, I could feel that deeply as well. And that always really, it hurt me. I understand her better now after, 3.5 years of being with her. But in those first moments and months and stuff, you're like, I feel a sense of like mourning and grief coming from her. And that's scary. I don't want to be the cause of that. I'm like, am I causing her to feel this? And then you start telling yourself stories, which is never a good place to be. And in those moments, what I will always credit, Tori for and myself for is, we could always come to each other and just simply check in. And sometimes it would lead to a very, very long and very helpful conversation. Other times it would be very quick and be like, oh no, here's where we actually are. And we were both totally just not kind of in the same wavelength, but now we're back together and on it. It's like, that was the thing that helped me understand and made me know that like, okay, this is for real. And also helped me grow to have frankly, a little bit more confidence in myself as a person, like within my relationships, and also grow a desire to be like, cool, these are awesome. I see how these relationships are reflecting Tori and what they mean to her. Like, I want that as well. And I've built, my own amazing relationships in the years past with those people, but as well as other people. It's like awesome.
Yeah, no, you guys are touching on incredible points, and I just want to like highlight a few things because you were also part of the event we threw together before launching Monocurious. And one of the reasons why we wanted to talk about the non-sexual intimacy is because that's one of the topics that really resonated with people. Like a lot of people came out of it talking about that. And I must say that, like, for me personally, and this is also for our listeners who might be non-monogamous, it just made me reflect on how I do relationships, because when I feel a connection with someone, because I do have that option of being sexual with them, if I feel that connection that might just be emotional, but then they're also attractive and then they also want to make out with me, then in my head it was like, oh, okay, why not?
Mm-hmm.
Just having that open, and then knowing that there's the option of being intimate, but without like doing that, because sex and making out and all of that can come with problems as well, right? So, I think that that's a takeaway that people in non-monogamous relationships can take from your relationship. So I'm curious if you have any advice for people who might be listening in monogamous relationships, but who might want that level of non-sexual intimacy. I guess, like, from both of your sides, but especially Jackson, how to have the confidence that your partner can go and have those relationships without them becoming sexual. Because in our society, relationships between men and women that are non-sexual, people start questioning, oh, but it's really nothing going on, like they have been seeing each other, you know what I mean? So, like, we come from that society, so there's a lot of deprogramming that you have to do. So I'm curious if you have any tips for people who might be struggling with that.
Yeah. There's a couple of things that I will say are necessary. One is the decoupling of the idea that intimacy is not necessarily a romantic thing. Like, I think you have to do a little bit of decoupling and, like you said, or deprogramming, whatever you want to call it, of like, what does intimacy actually mean to you? And if you can redefine that for yourself, that goes a long way, I've found. And, I what I found when I did that is like, oh, I actually had already quite a few very intimate relationships. I just never defined them as quote unquote non-sexual intimacy. That's what they were. I just called them friends. That was at the time my relationship that helped me a lot was the relationship with my business partner at the time. She and I were very, very close. We worked intimately together. I thought about like our relationship. I was like, oh, I am like super comfortable with her. Like we like snuggle all the time and have, dates all the time. We go out and do stuff all the time. I'm like, what's different in that relationship from that relationship? And it was like, oh, it's just what I called it, I guess. So yeah, that would be important, I think, just kind of a redefining of what intimacy actually means to you. And honestly, trust. Like Tori said, when you are with somebody, when you are partnered with somebody, you are holding someone's heart in your hands. Like that's just a fact. And you have to sometimes make it just as a decision to trust. And I made a very conscious decision to absolutely like trust Tori implicitly. And she's never once broken that trust or given me reason to doubt it. And that's really hard to do. I like, it's really, really hard for a lot of people to just to give that because shit gets fucked up sometimes and it hurts. I'm sorry if I can't swear on this podcast. No. Now it's mature rated. It's easier said than done, but trust is the thing. And I do trust Tori, and I will trust her until she gives me a reason not to. And I don't think she actually smirks.
Yeah.
But that's just the decision that I made. I was like, I believe in myself, I believe in her, and I believe in us, and I believe in the strength of our relationship. And so, yeah, I'm going to trust her. And then from that trust grows a lot of really incredible things. Those are the two things that I would say, like, I could leave you with. But mostly it's very much, personal journey kind of thing.
Absolutely.
And then, yeah, the other side, that negotiation of like being true to yourself and not negotiating on things that are core to who you are. And yet, right, this consideration that when you're growing into a committed relationship, you're holding someone else's heart. And yeah, there might be mourning in there and evolution. And those two things at times might feel like they can't happen simultaneously, but it might just take a little bit of time. But also, the biggest indicator of a great partner is the one who will meet you through that evolution. And I think there are just like really genuine red flags if you've got really genuinely close friends that are non-threatening, and you absolutely know that, and a partner is so threatened to the point of not wanting you to maintain that relationship. Like that, to me, that is a non-negotiable red flag. And so I think it also is part that it makes Jackson more attractive to me. Like,
You can be hotter. You hear that?
yeah, I mean,
You
like,
can be more hot. if you just-
like it's
Yeah.
more attractive to me the more he trusts me. And so it ends up, even when it's super vulnerable, it ends up even better because it's like I get to then have the satisfaction of, and we both do, as Jackson's saying, it's like we both get to have the freedom of our full selves to like embrace the relationships we want in our life. And that's why I think we say, yeah, like Lightning Society, this community, having the kind of monogamous relationship we have with awareness, like strong awareness of the different kinds of relationships and intimacy and emotional needs we have, it makes us actually stronger. And if we tried to like stop those needs, like it would definitely push us away. Like it certainly would push me away from him. And so
Yeah, we talked about that with another couple that we interviewed, John and Sue, about just like having the support in your life, your other relationships kind of just really feed you and then really set you up to be your best self in your monogamous partnership. But I think also non-monogamous partnerships, everyone can learn from this and have this experience.
Oh yeah.
Now, that advice is across the board. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I get it with friends. I get friend jealous more than I've ever gotten relationship jealous, which is like I could talk about for a whole other podcast.
So relate. When you mentioned that you had this, emotionally intimate relationship with a couple and how it fed you, I've had experience being emotionally intimate with a couple and being called a sister wife. I was single, so it was like a little bit different. Jokingly called this, and I like had feelings of jealousy if there was like another person that was like getting as close as I was in that sense.
Absolutely. And like jealousy, for me, it comes down to like, we all want to feel really special. And when someone makes you feel really special and important, it's like, yeah, this fear of it being taken away or that someone else might fill that part. And so how do I hold space for all these emotions while knowing that, like, not that they're irrational, they're actually quite rational. My brain is basically like afraid that I'm losing my spot in the community, in the tribe that is like that relationship. That's a very evolutionary instinct to feel the fear and feel the jealousy. I listened to something once and I forget who it was, but they were explaining FOMO, which I also suffer from greatly. And it's not actually the fear of missing out on like the event or the fun or your experience of it. Like what we're experiencing psychologically is the fear of the bonds that are happening between other people and the other relationships and missing out on that bonding. And that is just a very real evolutionary instinct we all have because of this exorcism from the tribe equals literal death. Like you can't survive. So it's these remnants of, another time when we really needed these capacities for fear and jealousy to keep us actually alive. Yeah. And I think it is worth talking about because it makes it extra more kind of shame feeling when you're like, I'm in this happy relationship. Why am I like deeply jealous that like friends of mine have a new friend? Or also like, when those friends then do like explore polyamory or you have really close relationships that you're non-sexually intimate with, but they're sexually intimate with others, the capacity to be able to have and hold and like maintain these relationships is awesome.
I 100% relate, Tori. I actually relate to so much of what you guys shared. It was really awesome to do this with you guys. So one last question we like to ask for the podcast is, like, what advice would you have for a monocurious person, given your experience? I know, like, we touched on a lot of things. So,
yeah, I would just say it doesn't have to be boring. Like, I think a lot of people think monogamy is just boring and it's like not interesting. I don't know. I feel the most interesting I've ever been. And I'm in a very serious monogamous relationship. So just rethink that, and why maybe you think that, if you think that.
I love that.
I love that. That's a great answer.
That's like kind of the epitome of the monocurious journey from my eyes, is like why I wanted to create this podcast series, like exploring that. So we appreciate that advice. Tori, do you have any advice?
So I was just going to say, which I honestly feel like is not even specifically, I think that my main piece of advice to anyone is the whole, don't talk yourself into it. And that goes for anyone, for any relationship. It'll feel exciting if you want it. And that, I think, goes both ways. It's like, if you're having to talk yourself into a monogamous relationship, don't do it. If you're having to talk yourself into exploring polyamory because your partner wants you to, like, don't do it. Yeah. And I think, like, it's the add-on to Jackson's, like, monogamy doesn't have to be boring. Monogamy doesn't have to be isolating either. Like, there is a world where being in a monogamous partnership can actually expand your capability for love and connection. And I think, I often say, Jackson was the first romantic relationship I encountered where it was the first time I ever felt like the possibilities expanded instead of diminished. And so I think that's, again, when I say, like, don't talk yourself into it, it's that, like, if you sense the diminishing, it's like, that's not it, because it can be more expansive. But I think your answer's better.
Yeah, I think
both are great. Both are great. Thank you so much. This was so lovely. I really enjoyed the conversation. I feel like we could have talked for hours, honestly.
Really appreciate you guys.
This is a lot of fun. Thank you.
We appreciate you. These are such enriching conversations to have and to hear. You're both amazing.
And that's it for Monocurious. Thank you everyone so much for coming along this journey with us. If you have not yet subscribed, please make sure to do so. If you're not subscribed, you won't get that notification when our new episodes come out. The third season of Polycurious is coming out in March, and let me tell you, it's a really good one. Even if you're monogamous, I'm sure that you can learn a lot from these couples. Also, if you haven't given us a rating yet, we would really appreciate it. There's actually no way of knowing how many people subscribe to the podcast, so ratings are basically the only indication others have to know how popular a podcast is. So if you want to support our mission, please just give us a rating. It takes literally 2 seconds and it would make us very, very happy. My email is polycuriouspodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on social media at Polycurious Podcast. I'll see you all in March with new episodes for the third season of Polycurious.